Why Game of Thrones Season 8 really failed, and how HBO can fix it. Welcome to the channel. Subscribe if you love House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, and deep dives into Westerosi lore. Let's begin. It was the most anticipated final season in modern television history. After nearly a decade of dragons, betrayals, prophecies, and political warfare, Game of Thrones Season 8 was meant to be a victory lap, a culmination of one of the most ambitious fantasy stories ever told. Instead, it became one of the most controversial endings in pop culture history. Critics were divided. Fans are furious. Petitions were signed. And HBO, once hailed for redefining storytelling, found itself at the center of a storm. But why did it fail? In this deep dive, we'll break down exactly what went wrong with Game of Thrones Season 8, from rushed plots and broken character arcs to studio interference and missed potential. And more importantly, how HBO can finally make it right. This is why Game of Thrones Season 8 really failed, and how HBO can fix it. Let's begin with the elephant, or should we say the dragon, in the room. Season 8 was only 6 episodes long. That's it. 6 hours to wrap up years of intricate storytelling, dozens of character arcs, ancient prophecies, and looming threats. Compare that to earlier seasons, which had 10 episodes and slower pacing, allowing for tension to build naturally. But in Season 8, everything felt rushed, compressed into blockbuster moments rather than carefully crafted chapters. Take a look. The Night King, built up over 8 seasons as the ultimate existential threat, is defeated in one episode, Episode 3, The Long Night. Daenerys Targaryen, the breaker of chains, becomes the Mad Queen within 2 episodes, with barely any internal struggle shown. Cersei Lannister, the series' main villain for much of the show, is reduced to a silent, helpless bystander crushed under rocks. And Jon Snow, the once promised hero, is relegated to whispering, "She's my queen," until stabbing Daenerys, only to be exiled north with barely any resolution. The pacing alone turned what should have been a slow burn into a chaotic sprint to the finish line. But why was the pacing so rushed? According to multiple reports, it wasn't HBO that demanded a short season. In fact, HBO offered more episodes and a bigger budget. It was showrunners David Benioff and D.B. Weiss who insisted on ending the show at 8 seasons and doing it fast. Why? Some say fatigue. Others believe they were eager to move on to other projects, including a Star Wars trilogy that eventually fell apart. Whatever the reason, the result was clear. A show that once prided itself on depth and complexity collapsed into convenience and spectacle. In Game of Thrones, characters were the soul of the show. From the honor of Ned Stark to the cunning of Littlefinger, from Arya's transformation to Tyrion's brilliance. These characters evolved, stumbled, learned, and captivated millions. But in Season 8, character development was sacrificed for plot progression. Let's start with Daenerys Targaryen. For 7 seasons, Dany was portrayed as a liberator. Yes, she was ruthless at times, but always with a moral code. She freed slaves, punished tyrants, and sought justice. Then suddenly, in Episode 5, she burns King's Landing after it had surrendered. Her descent into madness felt unearned, and that's the key issue. It's not that Daenerys turned dark, it's that the writing didn't build it organically. Then there's Tyrion Lannister. The once sharpest mind in Westeros becomes shockingly incompetent. He repeatedly makes poor decisions, trusts the wrong people, and delivers cringeworthy dialogue like maybe it was love. Tyrion, once hailed as the heart of the show, becomes a shell of himself. And what about Bran Stark? Bran says virtually nothing all season, offers no strategic advice during battles, and barely reacts to anything. Yet in the final episode, he becomes king of the 6 kingdoms with no build-up. His line, "Why do you think I came all this way?" implies it was all part of a grand plan, which is never explained. And finally, Jon Snow. The once central hero is turned into a passive bystander. He has no major dialogue in the finale, no leadership moments, and, after killing Daenerys, he's simply sent back to the Night's Watch, despite his heritage and sacrifice. These character endings could have worked, if they'd been earned through storytelling. Instead, they felt like bullet points the writers needed to check off. Game of Thrones was never just about swords and dragons. It was about the nature of power, the fragility of legacy, and the moral cost of leadership. But Season 8 abandoned many of the show's core themes. Take prophecy, for instance. The Azor Ahai prophecy? Forgotten. The prince that was promised? Never revealed. Bran's role as the three-eyed raven? Never explained. The White Walker's motivations? Completely ignored. The series once prided itself on subverting tropes, but it did so in clever ways. In Season 8, the subversions felt forced. When Arya kills the Night King, it shocked viewers, but also confused them. Jon Snow's entire arc was built around fighting the undead. His resurrection, his lineage, his warnings. But in the end, Arya runs and stabs. Cool moment? Yes. Satisfying storytelling? No. Then there's the moral ambiguity the show was known for. Earlier seasons blurred the line between good and evil. Cersei loved her children. Jaime redeemed himself. Even Sandor Clegane found peace. But in Season 8, characters were boxed into extremes. Dany becomes evil. Jon becomes passive. Cersei becomes irrelevant. The nuance that made Game of Thrones revolutionary was gone. There's no denying it. Season 8 was visually stunning. The cinematography, the battle sequences, the CGI, top tier. Episode 3, The Long Night, was one of the most expensive episodes of television ever made. But in focusing on visuals, the logic often disappeared. The Battle of Winterfell made little military sense. Why send your cavalry into the darkness? Why place your army outside the castle walls? Euron Greyjoy somehow ambushes a dragon with giant crossbows, then misses the next one flying straight at him. Arya survives a collapsing castle, dragon fire, and hordes of soldiers with barely a scratch. Yes, fantasy requires suspension of disbelief, but only when the rules are consistent. Season 8 bent the rules to serve moments, not logic. This shift, prioritizing shock value over coherence, left fans feeling insulted. Not because events were surprising, but because they were lazy. After the final episode aired, over 1.8 million people signed a petition asking HBO to remake Season 8 with competent writers. That's unprecedented. While some defended the ending, most longtime fans felt betrayed. They had invested years into a world only to be handed a rushed conclusion that discarded the depth they loved. Social media exploded with memes, parodies, and essays breaking down the flaws. Even cast members like Emilia Clarke and Kit Harington gave awkward interviews, clearly uncomfortable with how things turned out. But the world of Westeros isn't done. The fire still burns. The stories are still being told. And if HBO listens, learns, and respects the very audience that made Thrones a phenomenon, redemption is possible. Winter came. Now it's time for spring. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep analysis, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And let us know in the comments, how would you fix Game of Thrones Season 8?